Matter of fact, let's just make this simple and plain. I grab this, they won't remember his name. He'll be past tense. Literally go from Ave to memory lane. First.
You forgot about the little Noane. That thing be going crazy. And since Charlie bit me, it's one finger on the bait.
Facts. Y'all might have to play this back, but when you piece it all together, those are the type of lines that created smack. So
The 2010s played a major role in creating and molding battle rap into a sport and preserving hip-hop's raw and pure form. As the overall rap industry has moved further and further away from the ideals, battle rap has maintained those ideals while advancing the art form and making the culture evolve. We experienced various changes in this decade, and we're not only going to examine them year by year, but we will take the time to rank all the years in the decade. The rankings will be predicated on the impact the year had, how many great battles the year contributed, and how it pushed battle rap forward. For the sake of time, I will try to streamline all this content as best as possible. However, it's extremely difficult to discuss 10 years of amazing work and historical moments. And as a person who wants to provide a great deal of context and background, I will be as thorough as I can be. If you don't know by now, myself and many other people in the culture are wrestling fans. And a lot of times we incorporate the same terms and tropes within battle rap. With that being said, I decided to split the years into eras to provide a thematic background. The first era that many people acknowledge as the foundation in world wrestling entertainment is the Golden Era. I think this era in battle rap is 2003 to 2010. The second era is synonymous with being cutting edge and providing a new flair to the sport. The Attitude Era in battle rap is 2011 through 2016. And the last era I utilize for this decade is a hybrid between the ideals of the Attitude Era with innovative twist. The Ruthless Aggression Era is 2017 through 2022. With this backdrop, let's get into the first entry that sits as the worst year in the Attitude Era and the worst year of the decade. And at number 10, we have 2013. 2013 gets a lot of flack, and for good reason. Those 12 months were for sure lackluster, and it's even more glaring when the year prior was one of the best years. However, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the things that made the year stand out. URL particularly was one of the leagues who didn't put together a complete year of solid work. Two of their biggest events fell flat due to lackluster performances and an altercation that gave the brand a black eye. However, they had major contributions with the UFF tourney in connection with BET and the first installment of Born Legacy. UFF plays battle rap in a different light and opened doors for further commercial opportunities and played a huge role in making Ill Will a star. Speaking of stars, we were entering a new segment of stars as this was the year of bars over names. This led to the rise of Ill Will as the UFF champion, Tay-Rock as the new fan favorite, and B-Magic as the guy who was the MVP of the year. The irony in these guys being mentioned for this year is the fact that they all battled each other and put together some noteworthy battles. While the top tiers on the Euro platform took a bit of a backseat, you still had top tier battles that sparked great conversation. Hollow Don made his return against Sue Surf, and that battle was the most debated battle of the year. DNA vs. K-Shine was an extremely memorable battle and featured an all-time great third round. Goods vs. X Factor served as the nail in the coffin for X Factor's time as a top tier, and you also had Charlie Clips vs. B-Magic that gave way to B-Magic becoming the best battler in the game at the moment. Speaking of the Euro roster, a lot of those individuals found themselves in other leagues amidst the bars over names movement. Don't Flop had one of their most distinguishable years with high-quality battles. The most notable event was in celebration of Er's 24th birthday, Checkpoint. It was a star-studded card with the top of the card being a bulk of the attraction. You had DNA and Charlie Clips versus Unanimous and Chris Lees, Kruger versus Conceited, Tony D versus Charlie Clips, and Arsenal versus DNA. The headliner made for legendary moments. The 2-on-2 showcased the brilliance of DNA and Clips as a duo, and Kruger versus Conceited made for an entertaining clash. Hats off to DNA and Charlie Clips for doing double duty for the same event. Furthermore, on the UK front, Shadi Horror built off of his Arsenal battle the previous year and put on a clinic against Daylight, Nestle, and Math Hoffa. All three were across multiple leagues and multiple countries. This built immense momentum going into their rematch with Arsenal 2 years later. King of the Dot was one of the leagues that built off their previous year by delivering some really solid cards. Blackout 3 was a serviceable installment featuring HFK versus Sharon, Paste versus Math Hoffa, and an interesting title match between Arcane and Disaster. They follow up that event with Vengeance 2, where the standouts was Real Deal versus Tony D, DNA versus Thesaurus, and Fresco versus Rome. The last two major events that really solidified their year was Royal Dom 4 and Battle of the Bay 6. Royal Dom 4 was one of the best of the series and probably one of the best two-day events at the time. Day 1 was highlighted by Daylight versus Lopez for better or for worse, 100 Bullets versus JC, the rematch between Disaster and Arsenal, and DNA versus Sharon, which was a last-minute battle but ended up being one of the best that night. Day 2 was highlighted by Bonnie Godiva and Gaddis, a major battle for the ladies, Roan versus Real Deal, Charlie Clips versus Hollow Hand, and the coronation of Pat Stay with his title shot against Arcane. The latter was the most consequential because of the year he already was having and what his title run would mean for the brand. Battle of the Bay 6 topped off the year with Daylight versus Head Ice, The Deadman versus Chilla Jones, Dirtbag Dan versus Charlie Clips, DNA versus Pass, The Source versus John Adan, the legendary battle between Ilmac and Big K, and Disaster versus Arsenal. However, this doesn't include the Ground Zero battles that were a part of the weekend. We were blessed with the battle between Rumnity and Danny Myers, a battle that did wonders for both of their careers. The ladies continued to build traction and put on in a major way. Queen of the Ring put on 4 marquee events this year, and each event had 1 or more impactful battles. Evolution was a card that featured Don Lady versus QB. This was a heated grudge match that sparked a lot of press. The headliner included a dominant display from 40 Bars against Fair Funeral. This battle would play a major role in 40 being one of the top ladies on Queen of the Ring. The following event would be Bars Over Everything. While E-Heart vs. Shayna was a letdown due to the lopsided victory, Misfit versus Miss Hustle made up for it. The standouts for the no backing out card was Official's dominant display against K-Profit and Couture displaying her dominance against Norma Bates. For Official, this battle put her on many people's radars early on. For Couture, she established herself as a juggernaut in Queen of the Ring after already having a good year in 2012. And the last major Queen of the Ring card was Do or Die. The most notable battles on this card were Gaddis versus Shayna Ashley and Bonnie Godiva versus 40 Bars. Funny enough, Bonnie and Gaddis faced each other 2 months prior and had one of the best battles of the weekend. This time they were tasked with the 2 most lyrical ladies on the Queen of the Ring brand, and both battles were highly anticipated. 40 Bars and Bonnie, to many, was a mirror match, and many people left the battle being pleased with what they got. This battle became one of the first million-view battles between the ladies. A major milestone for the league and a major milestone for 40, who emerged as the woman to call for masterclass performances. Gaddis had a great performance for her Queen of the Ring debut, and Shayna had a great bounce back from her E-Heart battle. Oh, and we were also gifted with the first ever lady battle on SM with Miss Hustle versus Jazz the Rapper, another major step for female battle rap. While I started off saying that this year is the worst out of the 10, I can't deny how important it was for the growth of many battlers and how it shifted us into another phase of the culture. What hurts this year is the lack of great top-tier battles, great events from beginning to end, and bona fide classic battles in general. While the publicity and coverage was still present, the actual product itself seemed a bit underwhelming. At number 9, we have 2018. This was a pretty solid year in terms of battle quantity and culture-shifting moments. I will immediately announce, however, that this year was primarily driven by the production of RBE and URL. Queen of the Ring was in slight purgatory, and KOTD didn't throw as many events as they did in the past. But I will say KOTD still had battles worth noting, as they created a crossover massacre event that featured an amazing battle between Chilla Jones and Iris Solomon. They also had the second installment of Gannick vs. Gully that helped A-Ward build his momentum, and a decade anniversary card that was headlined by Pat Stay and Arsenal as a rematch. Pat Stay would have an exceptional year, making his debut across multiple leagues in his post-KOTD chain run. There are 2 individuals who were able to make noise without consistently being on top leagues, Bill Collector and A-Ward. These gentlemen both placed in the top 20 for 2018. A-Ward had 9 battles with only 3 of them being on KOTD, and Bill Collector's work was primarily on Battle Academy and Gates of the Garden. These guys would end up clashing on Crack Liberty Battle League and put on one of the best battles in both of their catalogs. It's also worth mentioning that Ward would put a major blemish on one of the Cody candidates this year. URL spent their year on the road, hitting different markets and building off the traction they gained in 2017. They started the year tapping into the DMV market with their reboot of Survivor Series. This was a card that was looking to give many of the mid-tiers and up-and-comers an opportunity to battle on the card that would garner a great deal of media presence. And honestly, it was a pretty solid card, with the card being filled with DMV talent. New Jersey Twerk and Mr. Wavy was the headliner, and the undercard included Jay vs. Diesel, Snake Eyes vs. Mac Mel, Holmesy the Guy vs. Craig Lamar, Moon vs. Young X, Prep vs. Franchise, Ryder vs. Press Mafia, and Jerry West vs. Jack Boy. Mr. Wavy pulled off an upset and ended up taking home the first ever Champion of the Night honors from the champion staff. Speaking of champion, this was the year where the first inaugural champion of the year was crowned. While the top 5 competitors were all worthy of obtaining the belt, it pretty much came down to Tay-Rock and No Red. And after an episodic debate about who were the top 20 battlers of the year, the panel ultimately crowned O-Red as the champion. Following the panel, URL would hit the road again to film the second installment of the Smack Volume series. This card had a bunch of returning faces, but was heavily built around the mega rematch between Hollow and Arsenal. The undercard would also raise some eyebrows as you got the grudge match between Young Cannon and Mike P, John Nadon's URL would turn against Romnitty, Big K's URL turn against T-Top, a contender versus contender match between O-Red and Cortez, and a battle between the seasoned all-time veteran against a rising young lion, Mr. Showtime versus Mr. Strapped In. On paper, this was a great way to strike while the iron is hot as Smack Volume 1 was a major success. However, this event didn't go as planned. For one, there was a 2-hour delay with the pay-per-view getting cut off. T-Top and Big K's battle was forgettable at spots. Mike P and Young Cannon was just a battle that ended up being a solid outing for both, and the main event ended up being a lackluster performance from both sides with the time limits enforced and the skirmish that occurred. The highlights was John Nadon pulling off an upset against the dangerous Romnitty, New Jersey Twerk having one of the best rounds of his career and of the night against Averb, and O-Red having the best performance of the night against a pretty good Cortez, the latter being one of the more notable ones due to O-Red winning Champion of the Night honors over several future Hall of Famers. 2 months later, URL would hit the road again and do their second spin-off of Born Legacy with Born Legacy Supreme 2. This was a maxed out Born Legacy event with bigger names and bigger venues, at least that's how it was marketed. The theme behind this card was sophomores versus seniors, as you had really seasoned veterans take on talents that were solidified but still were looking for the next step. I can honestly go on record saying that even though the building was scorching hot and the AC was pretty much non-existent, the event was pretty solid. Math Hoffa would continue his streak and have one of the moments of the night against Snake Eyes. Ryder and Cortez would put on a competitive bout, where Ryder earned some respect, Shotgun Suge had a clear win over Louise, X Factor and Jerry West would have an unexpectedly good match and garnered enough recognition from them both to return. DNA and O-Red put on the second best battle of the night that resulted into a debatable battle, and the birth of DNA's champion persona. JC and Geechee Gotti, which is the highlight of the night, had Battle of the Night, and Geechee walked home with the Champion of the Night honors, the first of many for him this year. Clips vs. Av was a bit of a letdown, but Av had a solid performance in his first 2 rounds, and Clips gave us a nice Infinity War scheme in the third. Oh yeah, and T-Top ended R Street's career for the most part. URL had their warm-up going into the Mega Gnome card with the second DMV Survivor Series card. While this wasn't as good as the first, you still had a couple notable moments to highlight. Clean Paper had a vintage performance against Young X and won Champion of the Night honors. Then we had Gnome 8, one of the biggest cards of the year, and it was marked as URL's first time in the Houston market. It felt like a special event, and it was a special time. The night starts off with a surprise battle between Scotty and Loso, the first PG one-off in Houston history. Scotty, as the hometown favorite, had a career-defining moment in his first round, and Loso showcased his talent on all fronts throughout the battle. This was indeed a great opener, and the energy would carry over into DNA vs. JC. This was another banger as DNA tore the building down in his first round, and JC did his part to carry the battle home and win the final 2 rounds. The energy hit an all-time high between New Jersey Twerk and Shotgun Suge. The Jersey vs. Jersey dynamic was already intriguing, but both of their ability to perform the physicality made this battle very entertaining. In my estimation, this was the best battle on the card, one of the best battles of the year, and one of the best known battles ever. And in the case of Twerk, he was the unanimous champion of the night, and this was one of the first career-defining moments that propelled him into being a superstar. The energy would take a little bit of a hit when Charlie Clips and Briz would take the stage. That was a letdown for many, but luckily the energy was back up once Tay-Rock and Goods took the stage. This was one of the best style clashes of the year and made for an extremely debatable battle overall. Then the energy would tune down again once Ill Will and T-Top occurred, but I will say Will won clearly, and Big Fat Funky Terrell is a classic. Then you had one of the main reasons why people bought the pay-per-view and the tickets to the event, Susar's return against Romnitty. There was electricity when both of those guys hit the stage, and they were duking it out for supremacy. Surf's first was immaculate, the second was competitive, but people only remember the final thing, which is Surf dropping the third. This made people very, very upset. While the event ended on a bad note, the overall event was deemed a success, and Houston became a major market for URL. 2 weeks later, URL will follow up Gnome with another event on the road in LA. Initiation was a card that had some pretty good matchups, but the event also dealt with a venue that lacked AC. The main takeaway from this card was Geechee Gotti won his second Champion of the Night award against Tech 9. Towards the latter portion of the summer, URL set the stage for an amazing Summer Madness card on paper. There were a lot of variables at play. 1, URL was engaging in an event war with RBE as RBE was having their biggest event a week later. 2, Hitman vs. Tay-Rock and Reed vs. Rex was finally booked. And 3, the event was happening in Las Vegas and Floyd Mayweather had a presence in the event. The face-offs for the event was actually shot in Floyd's training facility. Everything was set up perfectly. Then the battles happened. Half of the card choked, half of the battles were lackluster, and this went down as one of the most disappointing events ever. The main takeaways was Reed winning his legacy match against Rex, Av stopping Math's winning streak for the year, Geechee winning his third champion of the night against Shotgun Suge, DNA neutralizing Twerk, Ill Will and O-Red having a cringe classic, Iron Solomon and JC having their best effort of the night, and Hitman Holla winning a major battle against Tay-Rock. Also, Smack was infuriated. URL took a bit of a reset as they were trying to recuperate from the loss they took for SM7. They created a new concept for battles where unannounced battles would take place and be shot in an undisclosed area. The first band battle would be released in the month of September and it featured a good battle between Steams and Jackboy Maine. Shortly after that venture, URL experienced another phenomenon that went against the brand: the strike. After hearing rumblings that URL was making much more money than they were letting on, a set of high-profile battlers decided to go against the machine, quote unquote. But funny enough, the strike didn't last longer than a couple of weeks, and URL capitalized off the storyline by throwing the Strike 2.5 card. The card has some solid battles, but the best kept secret was the band battle that they had after the card with New Jersey Twerk and Chess. This was another stellar battle that helped both of them in their redemption arc. This battle was filled with viral moments and still sits as one of the best and highest viewed band battles on URL. The month of November was a breath of fresh air and helped the brand close out their year in a beautiful fashion. Fulfilling the promise that they set a year prior, URL gave us a second Summer Madness in the same year. While the name wasn't fitting for the season, the card was still heavily anticipated, especially with URL making their first appearance overseas in the UK. The headliner was another grudge match between Hollow the Don and John the Don. They were complemented with a good undercard as well. Pat Stay made his URL debut against Tay-Rock. You also had Soul vs. Gemini, T-Top vs. Iron Solomon, Rumnity vs. Geechee Gotti, and Arsenal vs. New Jersey Twerk in another Jersey vs. Jersey encounter. Every battle offered something to remember. Rumnity vs. Geechee Gotti was played on the big screen, and the crowd went bananas. Gemini and Soul put on for the UK. Iron Solomon's first two rounds against T-Top was lights out and put him in the Cody race. Pat Stay and Tay-Rock made for a great style clash and a memorable exchange. And the battle of the night was between Arsenal and New Jersey Twerk. And after speculation that John wouldn't make the battle due to legal issues, John the Don and Hollow will put on a solid main event where the battle favored John a bit more than Hollow. URL closed out the year in the most beautiful fashion ever with Smack Volume 3. This was by far the best event of the year. The card was really good on paper and very entertaining live, as scores were settled and points were made. Chef Trez had one of his best performances ever against a pretty good Loso. The bullpen backdrop made for an interesting backstory, and this battle helped Trez kick off his following year in a good fashion. After building his case for a full year, Mr. Wavy got what he asked for but didn't get what he wanted. Riz Rothstein demolished Mr. Wavy in every facet of the battle, and for many, this was the end of Mr. Wavy being a relevant figure in the game. JC and Av was also a barn burner as they embodied the term EFB before the formulation of the stable. This battle still holds up today in terms of replay value. While neither person lost any stock in the battle, Av was more on the winning side with the 60-40 split. The fourth battle was DNA vs. Mickey Fax. This had the biggest grudge on the card and was 7 years in the making, and the battle told a story from beginning to end. Mickey Fax put up a valiant effort but came up short against DNA's greatest performance. The energy continued to carry into the fifth battle, and the most hype battle on the card were Rumnity vs. New Jersey Twerk. The battle was on its way to being the greatest thing we ever saw. The first 2.5 rounds were perfect. Performance, haymakers, rebuttals, aggression, delivery, hunger, everything you wanted in a battle was there. Unfortunately, the energy in the battle was halted by words that went beyond battle rap. But luckily, they were able to finish what they started. This is still a great battle that sits as one of the best moments of the year and of the night. If we were being transparent, the most important battle on the card was the contender vs. contender match between Geechee Gotti and K-Shine. Both individuals had exceptional years. K-Shine was undefeated as he battled Young Cannon in Chicago, Enes in Philly, Av on the Strike 2.5 card, and dominated Jay Mills on Mills' return. Geechee Gotti won Champion of the Night 3 times, and he faced tough competition like JC, Rumnity, T-Top, A-Ward, and Shotgun Suge. This was accompanied by 6 other battles that he took on smaller leagues. This was billed as a championship match for many, and it was treated as such by both combatants. Each of them gave a really good performance, and there was a split decision in regards to the winner. O-Red and Iron wasn't the best battle, but it was a solid battle where O-Red showed why he was the reigning champion of the year, and Iron did enough to take a round in what looked to be a lopsided victory. RBE lived by two creeds, the first one being that less is more, the second one being that real winners bounce back from adversity. They only had 4 cards this year, but they did a lot with those 4 cards and had a lot of impact. The first was ultimately a doozy due to the main event, but let's start from the beginning. RBE's Lift His Soul 4 event had another great 2-on-2 performance from DNA and Clips against the Cannons. A good battle between Loso and Showoff, and an intense battle between Big K and John the Don. Now, small note, it was assumed that if any battle was to go left that night, it would be between these two. Although they got into a shoving match, they finished the battle without any fights. The real altercation came between Goods and Gems, as Goods sucker punched Gems in the face due to a mention of his daughter. The situation was messy, and it was the first time RBE really received negative press in the culture. And as a response, they threw a stellar card 3 months later. In the second installment of Pearly Gates, RBE raised the stakes with money on the line and judges for each battle. This card included a replacement battle between B-Magic and J Murda, a good contrast between Loso and Daylight, an amazing battle between Math Hoffa and Ill Will, and a top-notch performance from Pat Stay against Averb. The win from Math Hoffa made it abundantly clear that he was rejuvenated and primed for a major battle against Hollow the Don. Pat Stay would get his groove back and shock many people with his win over Averb, and Loso continued his streak as being one of the best new guys with a judge win over Daylight. But out of all the storylines, Murder Mook being announced on the following card was the most important thing that night. This led into the biggest and most important story of the year, the duel between Summer Madness 7 and the Rare Breeds event. I already gave the backdrop of Summer Madness 7, so I'll just skip to the RB side of things. The main event was none other than Murder Mook vs. Averb, a battle coming from left field but very intriguing with all the context provided. King Los was also announced to have his first ever modern bout in battle rap. This circumstance was met with major controversy as he was originally scheduled to face Daylight, and due to some behind the scenes conflict, Daylight was taken out of the match and Head Ice would fill in as the replacement. Besides the situation between Los and Daylight, the rollout and promotion for this event was A1. Averb and Mook had various face-offs and many interviews to sell the fight. And like I mentioned before, this would take place a week after Summer Madness, so that added fuel to the fire as they were directly competing in one of the biggest events of the year, and they came out of the war victorious. The night really picked up when Swave 7 and B-Dot touched the stage. This was a pleasant surprise to say the least. Swave turned back the clock in his first and had a well put together round. B-Dot powered through and gave a good performance in his last 2 rounds. King Los and Head Ice was a solid battle too for what it was worth. While Head Ice started off strong and tailed off towards the end, King Los was impressive and found his rhythm by the time he hit the back end of his first. And then ARP and the staff flipped the script and put Averb and Mook in the middle of the card. Mook had a masterful third, and Averb had an all-time first round, and the second was a fight. The battle almost drained the energy from the rest of the night, but luckily we had professionals that knew how to adjust. While Big K and Iron Solomon wasn't the best battle, Iron gave a solid performance considering that he battled JC a week prior. You also had a great battle between Danny Myers and Pat Stay. This was the epitome of preference and debatable. It made also for the most replayable battles on the card, which holds a lot of weight. And the event was closed out with a dominant victory from Ill Will against Big T. RBE completed the objective and not only gave us a really good event and reaffirmed that they're the league for the culture, but they also showed that they were more than capable of throwing mega events. And from there on, the dynamic between leagues were never the same. They closed out their year the best way possible with a solid event that featured Harlem vs. Harlem crime between K-Shine and J Mills. It also featured Shuni the Rapper vs. QB, Gems vs. Clean Paper, and the interstate battle between Ill Will and Calico. While Lift His Soul 5 wasn't perfect following up the Rare Breeds event, it did give us the best RBE battle of all time, and the best battle of the year. Will and Calico gave us a classic battle with a gritty feel that you can only get from the DVD days. It was also an indicator for what was to come for the brand in their upcoming year. While I spent a good duration of the time discussing the years that RB and URL had, I think there's one piece of the year that I didn't really cover in full detail: the 2018 Champion of the Year race. In my opinion, this was one of the closest races to the number 1 spot in champion history. Cody, specifically this year, raised the stakes for all events and all the battles. The top 5 candidates all had great years. JC had his redemption tour, Kichigati showed that he was a legitimate star, K-Shine had a streak of dominance, Iron Solomon had a career renaissance, and Pat Stay showed his range outside of the KOTD was still pretty good. This race not only shook up the game, but also further legitimized the award in the following years. 2018 gave way to New Rising Stars, Return of the Legends, and a dynamic shift in booking and promotion. The year did take a blow with King of the Dot and Queen of the Ring not being as active, but I do feel that the remaining leagues did their part in picking up the slack. The highlights are the new markets, the consistency in events thrown, the pay-per-view enhancements, and the competitive nature of the Cody candidates. I also think that the intensive focus on the middle of the card talent this year played a major role in the progression of battle rap. This year, a few letdowns occurred, but there was more than enough activity to fill in the gaps of misfortune. I would consider this year to be seen as a warm-up going into the new age of battle rap, and for that I have much respect for this year individually. But in comparison to other years, this sits right outside of the middle of the pack. At number 8, we have 2010. Honestly, 2010 was not a bad year. In fact, it's a pretty important year for battle rap. The only issue is that there wasn't as much activity in comparison to other years, but that's to be expected. This year was a building block for the rest of the decade to flourish. A lot of people consider this year to be a part of the golden era of battle rap, and rightfully so. This was a time of innovation, hunger, and legends being created. Unfortunately for Grind Time, 2009 was their pinnacle and 2010 was the beginning of the end. In my humble opinion, Hollow the Don vs. Awkward's on Battle of LA 3 was the kickoff for the decade, with it happening on the event and evening of New Year's Eve. It still sits as one of the most distinguishable battles on the brand. However, Grind Time's first 2010 event was Beatdown 2. Following that was the Massacre of the Bay. This included battles like Arsenal vs. Disaster, the Zorus vs. Dirtbag Dan, T-Rex vs. Awkwards, and Rex's first and only Grind Time battle, Ilmac vs. Nestle, Calico vs. Heartless, along with Marvin Quest vs. Dirtbag Dan and SoulCon. Speaking of SoulCon, he had a sensational year and probably the best out of any battler. He also battled QP on the same card and left with the performance of the night, preceding the 2-on-2. I will return back to SoulCon in a bit. Grind Time also had a second installment of Grizzlemania, one of their first great events they threw. The classic between Iron Solomon and E-Ness was labeled the headliner, and the undercard was Swave 7 vs. Sid Vicious, Gaddis vs. Emmy Miller, PH vs. Madness vs. SoulCon, Pass vs. Philly Swain, and the Thesaurus and Real Deal battle. The last major event that Grind Time threw this year was the Body Bag season card, featuring Disaster vs. Swave 7 and Cortez vs. Thesaurus. While Grind Time was moving out, KLTD, aka Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is, was building up towards major contributions. They opened up the decade with their first King of the Dot Grand Prix, where Arcane took the money home. The Source was a standout because he became the third King of the Dot champion in an on-the-spot title match against Halahan. A month later, King of the Dot had their first World Domination event that included Lopeshi vs. Real Deal, Bender vs. 24/7, Kid Twist vs. Disaster vs. HFK. The highlight of the night was the anticipated battle, though, between Pat Stay vs. Halahan. The title match also was included in this night with Mr. 2x Everything vs. Arcane. Arcane will become the first and only person to win the chain and the Grand Prix in the same year, although there is an asterisk next to the feat. This year was an integral part of them establishing their brand and building a major following, and the Grand Prix and World Domination will become the trademark for years to come. Queen of the Ring, which was formerly known as Grind Season, was bubbling up as they had their first ever event that featured E-Heart vs. Lady Trees. E-Heart would be instantly ingrained into the foundation and framework of Queen of the Ring with her lyrical prowess and her commitment to the brand. Another major battle that did wonders for the brand was an intense battle between Misfit and Duchess, where Misfit will become a household name on the league and one of the biggest stars at the time. But that was just the tip of the iceberg for the ladies, as these strides towards prominence would give way to the first ever lady battle on URL. In the undercard for Hitman Holla vs. Arsenal, E-Heart and Miss Hustle would make history, put on one of the best battles of the night. This is a perfect segue into the year that URL had. After starting up the Ultimate Rap League in 2009, the brand sought more talent and traction going into the new decade. They started off with a bang. In their second NYC event, SoulCon, Hollow the Don, Shotgun Suge, Sue Surf, and DNA all made their URL debut. SoulCon dominated Deacon Frost, adding to his already amazing year. Hollow the Don put on a clinic versus Big T as the headliner. Shotgun Suge dominated Hollywood. DNA showcased his will to win against P, and Sue Surf and Young Ill had battle of the night. They followed that event up with their third NYC event, which was just as eventful as the second. Suge had a masterful performance against Heartless and really put himself in a different light. Hitman Holla and Cortez put on a classic battle with timeless quotables. Rich Dollars had a rare win versus Calico. Aver beat Math in a solid battle. Goods vs. Conceited put on a battle to remember, and even with DNA's technical difficulties, he pulled off a win against Sue Surf. URL continued to throw multiple cards to bring on talent. They ended up garnering O-Red, Tay-Rock, K-Shine, Big Cannon, and Young Cannon in the process. O-Red's first URL battle would take place outside of a garage versus Black Haze, and Rock's first battle would be against Shotgun Suge on the same day. URL's 7th event would be another solid card, with Marv 1 having a really good debut against Cortez, Big T clearing DNA, and the controversial battle between Shotgun Suge and Calico. Besides the comments about the Detroit legend, a notable thing to highlight is that the difference between metaphors and real rap was coined this night. We were also given the one-off between Tay-Rock and K-Shine that welcomed Tay-Rock into Dot Mob and served as Shine's URL debut. URL closed out the year with the Arsenal and Hitman card. As I alluded to earlier, Hitman and Arsenal was one of the biggest cards of the year. This was due to Hitman and Arsenal being the biggest grudge in the sport and on the internet. The card from top to bottom was pretty good, with Tay-Rock vs Young Cannon, Red vs Wave Seva, Soul Khan vs Fox, Miss Hustle vs E Hart, and K-Shine vs Shotgun Suge. This was a card filled with dominant wins. K-Shine beat Suge, Swave beat Red, and Soul Khan demolished Fox. The ladies stole the show for a segment with their lyrical exchange, but the most impressive feat was Hitman's victory over Arsenal. This molded him into a superstar instantaneously, and this year goes down as one of his most formative years as a legend. On top of the league activity, many of the battlers entered into the Red Bull MC tournaments in multiple regions. No Can Do, Thesaurus, Dirtbag Dan, Disaster, and Ilmac were part of the San Francisco competition, and No Can Do pulled out the victory and stepped himself as a freestyle legend. DNA would win the NY competition and made it to national finals in Detroit, but ultimately would lose in the end. We were given a good deal of new talents, and it was an effective way to close out the golden era of battle rap. This was a time where battle rap was still in its purest form, but was giving way to a lot of changes. You had Queen of the Ring giving the ladies a platform, King of the Dot picking up the baton from Grind Time, and Smack fully shifting into URL. We were witnessing a battle rap metamorphosis. This was also a year where the Midwest movement was forming and becoming an actual powerhouse in the sport. From the standpoint of impact, I can see why people want this higher. With anything that serves as a building block for a larger result, there's typically a great deal of homage and honor paid. While I do think this year deserves a great deal of honor, there are years that have more impact and a lot more content provided. At number 7, we have 2015. From here on, there aren't any years that should be considered underwhelming. 2015 showed a great deal of consistency in major events, moments, and great battles. All major leagues provided the culture with great content, as this year was the year of viral moments and mega matches. Queen of the Ring had another solid year as they started off their year going on the road to ATL and LA in pursuit of rising talents in the ladies division. However, the main things to highlight was Panic Room 3 and No Holds Barred 2. Panic Room 3 featured C3 vs Bonnie Godiva, Fair Funeral vs Diesel, My Verse vs Star Smiles, Shooter the Rapper vs Duchess, KCJ vs Miss Miami, and 40 Bars vs Shayna Ashley as the main event. While the main event wasn't as great as we would have liked, 40 still gave a great performance and maintained her status as a literal queen of the ring. C3 had a good return versus progressing Bonnie Godiva, and KCJ left with Body of the Night in her breakout performance against Miss Miami. No Holds Barred 2 was a card of shots as KCJ took on Don Lady on her return, Robin Rhymes took on Jay Smooth on her return, Mulatto Black took on Shuni the Rapper, and C3 took on E Hard. The card was already a success as the A-side showed that they were still primed to win and their counterparts were ready to assume the mantle for female battle rap. And this card was capped off with the highest viewed battle on the platform with NWX versus Bonnie and 40. However, the most talked about feat this year were the ladies putting on in large arenas. All a year prior, Miss Hustle became the first lady to battle on Noame and SM. This year, Official and Jazz the Rapper followed suit as Official took on Jazz the Rapper on Noame 5 and Miss Hustle on Summer Madness 5. While Official had her career high against Jazz, she came up short in Hustle's return. However, all three of them contributed to something special and played a major role in providing more exposure to the queens in the game. RBE built off of their first year by putting on major bar fests and impactful moments. They started their year with Blood, Sweat, and Tears 2 that had None vs. K Walker, C3 vs. Mulatto Black, Big Cannon vs. Mr. Mills, JC vs. Adi Boom, and Ill Will vs. Show Off as the undercard. The main event and the most talked about battle of the night was none other than Block vs. Block, Daylight vs. Oops. Both of their thirds are still heralded as one of the most impactful rounds in RBE history. They capitalized off the energy of the last event by doing a 2-day, 2-event weekend. Blood, Sweat, and Tears 3 and Lift His Hold 2. The first night included J Murder vs. Rosenberg Raw, Oops vs. Born, Cortez vs. Gems, Charlie Clip vs. Adi Boom, and Arsenal vs. Show Off. The second night had Unos Lavos vs. Zer Money, Bill Collector vs. J400 Block, Danny Myers vs. Chilla Jones, and Big Cannon vs. JC. The standouts were Arsenal and Show Off in an aggressive, controversial battle, Danny Myers vs. Chilla Jones, and Big Cannon vs. JC. The latter functioned as the Block vs. Block series that seemingly picked up steam. Don't Flop will put on in a major way this year with over 15 cards and take their brand on the road for some US events. The most notable events were Resurrection, Checkpoint 2, the Chicago card, and the Detroit card. Resurrection featured an amazing headline battle between Chilla Jones and Math Hoffa. This was Math's first major battle after the disaster incident, and it was not only an impressive showing from him, but it was also a building block for Chilla Jones' impactful year. Another impactful battle was the 2-on-2 between K-Shine and DNA in their first outing against John Don and Family Man Hayes. This battle would kick off their 2-on-2 tour for the next couple of years and help them form their group NWX. The Chicago card is beloved by many due to the main event spectacle between Averb and Hitman and DNA and K-Shine. The battle included a lot of antics, a lot of special moves, and a lot of slogan flipping, but nonetheless made for one of the most memorable moments for Don't Flop. Outside of Daylight walking out of the Rome battle and K-Shine slapping Sharon in the face, Don't Flop had a good year. URL had another good year that included new series, new talents, and a barrage of good battles to acknowledge. The year starts off with them pushing their UFF class to the spotlight as they have a special one-off between Prep and the Saga in the infamous Black Star store. This battle was sensational and made many fans get behind the development of the newer talent. Shortly after, the URL would throw a series of PG events, specifically on the West Coast. While you got a chance to see Kelly Smooth, Emerson Kennedy, and Stewie Newton, the major standout was the clash between Steams and Rum Nitty. They immediately put themselves at the top of the line when it came to matriculating through the PGs. All of this was the launching pad to a former rookie orientation and battle rap style, rookies versus vets. All the veterans gave a good effort, and a little more than half of the rookies showed that they could compete. Mr. Wavy would score the biggest upset of the night against K-Shine. Chess and DNA would be the best back and forth of the night, regardless of the hiccups in the beginning. Shotgun Suge and Saga made for an interesting contrast and approach. Real Deal would have body in the night against Snow. Averb and John would show levels against their rookie combatants, and T-Top and Clips made for a solid closeout to a solid event. Rookies vs. Vets was the quintessential warm-up going into one of the biggest cards of the year, Noame 5. Noame 5 was incredibly action-packed and filled with legends. This was a historic night as it was URL's first time doing pay-per-view for an event, and there was a plethora of mega matches on the card. Charlie Clips vs. Hollow Don, Sue Surf vs. Tay-Rock, Averb vs. K-Shine, DNA vs. Sirius Jones, Jazz the Rapper vs. Official. Every battle had stakes and the energy was through the roof that night. The first battle of the night was Averb vs. K-Shine, and quite frankly, K-Shine had a top 3 known performance of all time. DNA and Sirius Jones was one of the better back and forths of the night, where DNA was consistent and Sirius Jones had a good second to make the battle competitive. But then we got another lopsided battle where Official snapped herself as an elite and pulled a major upset versus Jazz the Rapper. The mega match of the night was Hollow Don versus Charlie Clips. This was essentially a battle for the GOAT title. Hollow Don came out victorious with his legendary first round and his genius plan of attack. While Clips went on to get another mega match on another major card, this was a major blemish on Clips' career. And lastly, we got the long-awaited Surf vs. Rock match. Prior to them becoming gun title members, they put on a pretty good known battle that could be debated either way. While many people felt that this battle was slightly underwhelming, I will go on record saying that this battle aged beautifully over time. URL returned a month later with a new series called Redemption. While this was a side B card, it had some pretty good moments. Chilla Jones returned and demolished Prep from beginning to end. Dot gave us some quotables against Bill Collector. Danny Myers and Rex handled some unfinished business. Tay-Rock handled business against Riz Rothstein while making quotables in the process. And Shotgun Suge had performance of the night against a pretty good T-Top. But unfortunately, the night was soured by an altercation between NWX and Cake Life. Maintaining their theme of building up the rookies and mid-tiers, URL took their brand on the West for the first installment of Traffic. The battles that stole the show was Rum Nitty vs. Chess and Danny Myers vs. Danger Zone. Both of these were barfest and featured some of the best written content all year. It's important to note that this was another block versus block encounter for the year, and this was one of the best performances of Danger Zone's career. After a solid West Coast card, the URL returned back to the East for the major Summer Madness 5 card. This Summer Madness is slightly underappreciated in hindsight. There wasn't one bad battle on this card. All battles were entertaining regardless of if they were one-sided. T-Rex and T-Top was a good battle. John Don was very entertaining against Mr. Wavy. Miss Hustle and Official was entertaining. The 2-on-2 rematch was solid. Big T and Shotgun Suge had a fire back and forth. And Tay-Rock and Calico is an all-time great battle in the SM collection. And on top of this, we were given Loaded Lux versus Charlie Clips, which is one of the most controversial battles from beginning to end. URL closed out their year with a Perfect Dated Eye 2 card and a PG card to match as the ribbon on top of a good year. The PG card serves as a foreshadowing of the next movement in the 2016 campaign. KOTD continued their streak of good years by having another good year in the books. They started with Battle of the Bay 7, where you had the Swords vs. Bender, a bar fest between Latazay and Rumnitty, and the controversial battle between Mr. Fab and Arsenal. Only a month later, they returned with their best Blackout card ever with Blackout 5. As a 2-day event, they had 16 total battles. The major ones included Daylight vs. Mad Child, Big T vs. Roan, Conceited vs. Dumbfounded, Ilmac vs. DNA, Head Ice vs. Serious Jones, Shoddy Horror vs. Hitman, and the title match between Pat Stay and Sharon. Building off the success of Blackout 5, they looked to add a little bit more innovation to the year by adding 2 new series to their platform, Back to Basics and Massacre. Back to Basics plays a major role in repopularizing the pit-style presentation of battle rap and maximizing a smaller setting. The first installment included a pretty solid headliner between 2 mega legends, Roan and the Saurus. The second one contained the East vs. West theme that included even more solid matchups, Disaster vs. Chilla Jones, Daylight vs. Danger Zone, and JC vs. Psychosis. But the third was the pinnacle in the series, that included the Ground Zero battle between Frack and Coma, Daylight and QP, Caustic vs. Big K, Madflex vs. Lucifer, DNA vs. Dirtbag Dan, Arsenal vs. Paz, Disaster vs. Jonai, and the Swords vs. Fresco with the money on the line. Most notably the last 2 because of the historical significance and the ripple effect it would cause. Massacre was another major card with mega names on it. You had top tiers from all corners jumping in the ring. Past Day vs. Calico, Conceited vs. Chilla Jones, Pass vs. Charlie Clips, Big K vs. Ill Will, Rome vs. Goods, and Excel vs. Danny Myers was exceptional for booking, and the output was above par. While Big K and Ill Will had the best battle of the night, the most talked about battle was Past Day vs. Calico, as it was filled with tension and many memorable moments. On top of all of this, you had the well-revered World Domination card that held up its end of the bargain with 2 days of action-packed content. The first day was a good lead-off with Sketch Diminish vs. Disaster, Bender vs. Soul, Sharon vs. John Jonadon, and the dual-headed main event with Shoddy Horror vs. Arsenal as the sequel, and Disaster vs. Dumbfounded. The second day had even more of a stacked card with Definition vs. The Saurus, Real Deal vs. Head Ice, Chilla Jones vs. Pass, Rome vs. Kid Twist, Iron Solomon's return against Daylight, and the end of an era with Ilmac vs. Pat Stay. This card was a very consequential piece in battle rap history, as Iron will reignite his career and the chain will go through a series of hands. I do want to take a small time to highlight another duo of cards that close out the year. One of them kind of serves as the last major event from Guerrilla Warfare, Crown 2. Similar to the first Crown, the fans in Chicago were gifted with a card that had pretty good matchups on paper. If you haven't noticed already, on paper isn't the end-all be-all. The card included the return of Lady Luck against Official, Susur vs. Averb, Big Cannon vs. Charlie Clips, Math Hoffa vs. Big K, Daylight vs. Old Red, Ill Will vs. K Shine, John Jonadon vs. Young Cannon, JC vs. Born, and Heavy Half vs. XL. And to be quite frank, the highlight of the night was Daylight vs. Old Red, which was unforeseen by many due to Daylight's unpredictable nature and Old Red's dense lyricism. The second card was an event in the UK that contained some pretty high-profile stars. The first rendition of Past Day vs. Hollow the Dawn, Charlie Clips vs. Gemini, Hitman Holla vs. Bonkers, Arsenal vs. JC, and Math Hoffa vs. Tony D. While there were a series of individuals who put on good performances, Past Day and Hollow were the talk of the night and would display a preview of how great a full battle would be. All in all, this was a pretty good year. Long-awaited matchups were here. We had returning legends, new stars, big cards, the whole nine. While there were a few anticlimactic outcomes in some of the matches, the good outweighed the bad. The standout moments this year was the resurgence of 2-on-2s led by DNA and K Shine, Suge's run towards his first SM, Chilla Jones' run and return to URL, Danger Zone having a breakout year, Iron Solomon's return, the ladies making history on multiple leagues, KOTD throwing culture-shifting cards, Tay-Rock becoming the face of URL, and the UFF class stepping up. While this year is outside of the top 5, it is worthy to be in the consideration due to the impactful events and plethora of good battles. "2016 was a good year for battle rap and hip-hop in general. We were given movement, new energy, and much-needed balance. Everyone from big leagues and small leagues contributed something important to the year. Black Ice Cartel gave us some pretty good matchups and memorable moments. JC versus QP, QB versus Chilla Jones, Charlie Clips versus Danny Myers, Danger Zone versus DNA, and Danger Zone versus Big T are a few that come to mind. JC and QP is the most noteworthy of the bunch due to the presentation and the layered writing from both figures. Bullpen also kicked up some dust by throwing pretty good cards: Fade, Any Last Words, and Close Range. Fade consisted of Lucid vs. Excel, Tylaw vs. PC, Riggs vs. Cortez, K-Shine vs. Sharon, and DNA vs. Chef Trez. All the battles delivered. Lucid and Excel had a pretty good dialogue, DNA and Trez had a slugfest showing their prowess as freestylers, and K-Shine and Sharon handled some differences in the completed battle. The Close Range event was even more important and impactful as John Jonadan invited his all-star counterparts to the ring to offer a look to the Bullpen roster, and for the most part, they made the most of their opportunity. LA Battlegrounds will be another small league that will garner a lot of attention by booking a West vs. West battle between Danny Myers and B-Dot. When we talk about the best battles of the year, this is easily one of the top three. The dialogue, the substance, and the lyricism displayed in this battle was a breath of fresh air, and it put B-Dot and Danny Myers in different conversations. For Danny Myers, he broke the stigma of being a rapid robot puncher. He was a guy who could break the mold for any opponent. For B-Dot, he created a lane and an emphasis on content and commentary. The big leagues place a good deal of focus on developing new stars in top tiers, and in doing so, the small rooms will become the center point of many good battles. URL specifically took the time to revamp and redesign one of their pre-existing blueprints to spotlight the up-and-comers. Born Legacy 2 created a major ripple effect, and Born Legacy 3 reaffirmed the fans' desire for these bar-fests and smaller environments. Born Legacy 2 was headlined by Reed Dallas and Chess. This was a battle that was surprisingly good and featured some of Reed's best moments in a modern-day form. However, there were two battles specifically that stepped the event. The first one was Tink the Demon vs. Mike P. They had many viral moments and very good material on both sides, and both of their stock rose at the moment. However, the second battle did a lot for the culture in general. Av vs. Rum Nitty. This was a battle that stopped and reset the game as we knew it. Av Rum Nitty was another battle that was heralded as one of the best of the year, and to this day, it's one of the most rewatchable. These four acts will be viewed differently after this night, and they created a great demand for another event and another card. But prior to the next Born Legacy card, we had another order of business to handle before returning to smaller environments. Because of the phenomenon of 2-on-2s the year prior, URL wanted to do something fun and innovative. 3 weeks after Born Legacy, URL threw the first ever 2-on-2 card labeled Double Impact. It was a fun night and many points were made. Marvin Quest were still one of the best when it came to 2-on-2s, Riz and T-Top gained major followings, and while NWX was an excellent tandem, Gun Titles was just as deadly, if not more. With Gun Titles demolishing them, it added more fuel to the fire in the NWX versus .mob/Camgate encounter. In hindsight, the hype was actually the only great thing to come out of the exchange, as no real matchups will ever develop besides K-Shine and Rex a year later. Due to their battle being incomplete, the URL capitalized off the circumstances and built a card around their rematch. Unfinished Business 2 was a theme card that involved a series of battles that were unresolved. While the card itself wasn't the greatest, it offered impactful moments. Shotgun Sugar and Briss Rothstein had Battle of the Night, NWX was able to get revenge, and both T-Top and Rum Nitty had high-profile wins against legends. URL went back to their small room formula and gave us Born Legacy 3. While you can argue Born Legacy 2 was more impactful, 3 had much more quality throughout the entire card. It was a 2-day event. Chess had an immaculate performance against the Saga, New Jersey Twerk debuted against Dougie, Swave 7 had a vintage performance against Tink, Daylight had a fire battle with Mike P in his URL debut, and Illwill made his URL return and had an incredible battle with Rum Nitty. Capitalizing off their great experience in the West the year prior, they also threw the second installment of Traffic. While there was a major battle that didn't occur, we were able to get a masterful performance against Briss Rothstein against Pass and an old-fashioned bar fest between Young Cannon and Danny Myers. Particularly for Danny, this battle added to an already amazing year and really boosted him in the top-tier conversation. And they closed out the year with a solid PG card that featured Chef Trez and Ryda, and Gnome 6. This card was heavily anticipated as it included some new stars and major battles. T-Top vs. Surf was the headliner, and Rum Nitty vs. Tay-Rock was the co-headliner. You also had Arsenal vs. Briss Rothstein and Illwill vs. Charlie Clips as the undercard. Tay-Rock and Rum Nitty was the most talked about battle on the card as it was built up all year. By this moment, Nitty was really gaining traction as becoming a top tier. He not only was having some of the best material all year, but he was also a part of the best battles without any blemishes on his year. Meanwhile, Tay-Rock was maintaining his status as the best active battler in the game, making moments, winning battles, and being consistently great. Unfortunately, it was the most disappointing battle on the card because neither of them were on the A game. However, the rest of the card was fun to watch. Will and Clips had good moments, Briss Rothstein had a superb performance against a solid Arsenal, T-Top and Surf was the best back and forth of the night, which would serve as Surf's last battle until he returned in 2018. With all this being said, though, the surprise battle between Av and Chess stole the show. Chess gave a great showing, and Av gave us one of the best big stage performances of all time. Queen of the Ring trimmed down their production a tad, but still gave us two major cards. Watch the Throne 2 was blockbuster as the top 4 battles were KCJ vs. Robin Rhymes, Toreador vs. Couture, Tay-Rock vs. C3, and 40 Bars vs. E-Heart. KCJ and Robin was a good measuring stick for who was ready for the next step. Tay-Rock and C3 was a viral battle and memorable moment for the year. Couture and Tori was able to finish their battle from the year prior, and 40 Bars and E-Heart was everything we expected and more. Easily one of the best battles on the platform and the best in their catalog. They also had their own rendition of Rookies vs. Vets that included Farafuna vs. Robin Rhymes, Tia S vs. Shuni the Rapper, Miss Smirk vs. SO Finesse, and Don Liddy vs. MBD. King of the Dot had another good year, but funny enough, Blackout wasn't their biggest event, or best event. They still had one of the best battles of the year with Iron Solomon and Disaster, along with the title match between Rona and Ilmac. But the best card this year was Massacre 2. DNA vs. Bangs, Jonah vs. Danny Myers, Big K vs. Head Ice, Iron Solomon vs. B Magic, and Pat Stay vs. Hollow the Dawn made for an incredible event and the best Massacre card out of the series. The aesthetic, the presentation added to the event, and each battle took it upon themselves to have the best version of themselves that night. Pat Stay and Hollow, and along with B Magic and Iron, particularly, could be considered some of the best battles on the platform. KOTD will also have the other staples that they typically do in their calendar year, but similar to Blackout, there were a couple of good battles but nothing extraordinary. World Dom 6 would peak with Iron Solomon vs. Charlie Clips, Paste vs. Sirius Jones, Arsenal vs. Cortez, and a title match between the newly crowned champion Roan against Caustic. As a special aside, Franchise and A-Ward get their first major look as they were the main event in the Ground Zero battles for that weekend. What's important to know that this would be the first year that the Gully vs. Gannick event would take place, as Gully would side with the newer guys and Gannick was sliding with the vets. Daylight vs. Jonai would be the headliner, with Charlie Clips vs. Shotty P, The Source vs. Carter Deems, Bender vs. Peanut, Real Deal vs. A-Ward, and Marv 1 vs. Lex Luthor as the undercard. The card was ultimately a success and would encourage the KOTD staff to continue the series. What really kept KOTD's momentum were the bunker events they created throughout the year. They had a total of 5 events that included this theme. There were a plethora of good battles and performances that came in these events. The Source vs. QP, Fresco vs. QP, Big K vs. Cortez, Disaster vs. Official, and B Magic vs. Enes were exceptional to the collection. However, the very last bunker event was arguably the best, with battles like Nestle vs. Matt Flex, Saint LA vs. Geechee Gotti, Cortez vs. B-Dot, and The Source vs. Aver. Another instance where the smaller settings help revitalize the sport. RBE started their year off with a bang and won the first ever team vs. team cards in battle rap history. This was Team Hami vs. Writer's Block. You had Swave 7 vs. Danny Myers as the main event, Mac Myron vs. Oops, XL vs. Big Cannon, Moneybag vs. B Magic, and JC vs. J Murder as the undercard. The competitive nature of each combatant was felt throughout the entire night and made for an extremely entertaining event. While the judging was controversial in spurts, the overall event gave RBE mass momentum. They returned with the Blood, Sweat, and Tears 4 event and gave us some pretty good battles. We got a great battle between QP and Official, a surprisingly competitive battle between Mr. Mills and JC, a solid battle between Big K and Show Off, and a good performance from Sirius Jones against Gems. And we also got a Daylight and J Murder battle that provided many laughs. RBE will also throw 4 validation cards within the same year. This was the card that they created a year prior. We were given Bonnie Godiva vs. Averb, Show Off vs. Heavy Half, Mr. Mills vs. Marv 1, and B Magic vs. Family Man Hayes. The best battle to come out of this series, though, was none other than Craig Lamar vs. JC, where Craig Lamar rose to the occasion and JC continued his streak of pure dominance and consistency on the RBE platform. Lastly, we did have a major event by the New Jersey legend Arsenal on UW. Every bar counts. This was an event that had a massive doubleheader. Arsenal vs. Tay Rock and Shotgun Shook vs. Sue Surface, the main event. While you did get an entertaining exchange between Rad B and DNA, the meat and potatoes were these top 2 battles. Arsenal and Tay Rock was a pretty good battle, as they both rapped really well and made moments in both of their rounds. The main event wasn't the most pleasant, as the battle wasn't really about raps and the entourages failed to keep their composure. This was easily a low light in each of their careers, and I guarantee both of them regret taking the battle in the first place. If I'm being truthful, there isn't that big of a margin between 2015 and 2016. Both years are solid years that contain major moments. Honestly, we even argue that 2015 may have more battles in the grand scheme of things. However, I have to side with 2016 with their peaks, as they were a little bit more pivotal to the rise of newer talents, and also provided a great balance between small and big events. This was also one of the best years of league parity. There were also a lot of firsts. First double impact, first surprise battle unknown, first year without a Summer Madness, first goalie versus Gannon card, and the first real team versus team card with judges. This was a perfect way to close out an era of innovation.